My father delivered the words that would permanently alter my life. As I stood in my grandmother's study, he yelled, "You're not even her real granddaughter." His voice was icy, and his eyes were brimming with rage. The family fortune should only be awarded to blood relatives. I went cold. I was unable to breathe for a while. When I said, "What are you talking about?" my heart was beating so loudly that I could hardly hear myself. He scoffed. "Emily, don't pretend to be innocent. The small secret of your mother is no longer a secret. The room's weighty bookcases, antique paintings, and the peaceful atmosphere, still tinged with my grandmother's memory, captivated me. We had only been burying her for 3 days. I had assumed that we would be grieving together, but my father was destroying everything instead. The Blackwell name had always been a source of pride for grandmother Eleanor. Tradition, lineage, and family were important to her. My father was now claiming that I was not a true Blackwell. He kept pacing the carpet. "You won't get anything once the lawyer says you're not my daughter." I tried not to show my feelings as I looked at him. "Do you truly think she should only inherit from her blood relatives?" He didn't think twice. "Yes, indeed," he acted without hesitation. "He will ensure that the legacy of the Blackwells endures. Individuals like you will not perpetuate this legacy. Fake." Nothing struck me more strongly than that word. Emily Blackwell is my name. My age is 27, and I thought Douglas Blackwell was my biological father until 5 minutes ago. I felt alienated in my own family, even though I was standing in the same room where my grandma had always greeted me, listened to me, and supported me. My father, or perhaps not my father, turned away and left the room, seemingly resolving the issue. However, it wasn't. I settled myself in my grandmother's chair. The hint of her lavender scent was still there. Touching the surface where she had once signed her will and penned notes made my hands shake. I had always felt loved and seen by her. She had often assured me that her estate would remember me. Now, however, everything was in doubt. My phone started buzzing at that point. My mom texted me about it. "We must discuss your father. This evening, by themselves." My heart was racing as I gazed at the TV. This kind of secret, which had been kept for 27 years, was about to be revealed. Furthermore, I was clueless about the implications for both myself and the family I believed to be familiar. My mother and I met later that night in a little cafe tucked away in a corner of the city. Far from the world of old money and polished appearances, it was silent. The people passing by showed no interest in Blackwell. Blackwell remained merely a name. When I entered, she was sitting at a table by the window. She had a new appearance, somehow smaller. She wore no makeup, and her flawless hair was tied back in a basic ponytail. Her eyes appeared worn out from years of suppressing something, not just from the past few days. She wasted no time. She trembled as she said, "I never wanted you to find out this way. Douglas, your father, had no right to say such things to you. It was inhumane. So it's accurate?" I inquired. I hardly raised my voice above a whisper. "Is he not my biological father?" She nervously twisted her wedding ring while looking down at her hands. She then gave a nod. "Indeed, it's accurate. However, it's not as simple as he claimed." The truth suddenly started to come to light. She had fallen in love with James Blackwell when she was young, long before I was born. My uncle. He is the younger brother of Douglas. She informed me they were serious. They hoped to start a life together. James, however, was accepted to a research program in Seattle after that. They decided he ought to go because it was a significant opportunity. They made an effort, although it was difficult, to make the great distance work. The letters became slower. The calls grew brief. Douglas then intervened in the silent void between them. My mother looked out the window and muttered, "He was always there, always looking for an opportunity." She resorted to him during a time when she was feeling lonely. She was weak, but they were never really in love. Then she discovered she was expecting a child. "With tears in her eyes, I knew it was James's child," she remarked. The timing seemed obvious. By that time, however, James had already become engaged to someone else, and Douglas he immediately proposed. He assured me that it was beneficial for me to marry him. He assured me that marrying him would benefit the infant and ensure consistency. She gave me a guilty expression at that moment. "Emily, I wasn't lying to you. I did it because I believed it would benefit you the most." I reasoned that things could feel more genuine if we started a family. Douglas also vowed to raise you as his own. But with grandmother's passing and the inheritance on the table, that promise was no longer valid. I was never considered Douglas's daughter. Douglas did not consider me his daughter. And now, he sought to expel me entirely by using the very truth he had vowed to defend. My mother gripped my hand and stated firmly, "But he's wrong. Still, you're a Blackwell. You are the daughter of James. You are therefore Eleanor's granddaughter by blood." Like a wave, the irony struck me. My father was never the man who had lived his entire life trying to make me feel like I didn't belong. And Uncle James, the man I'd always felt oddly connected to, was the one who unintentionally gave me my name, my eyes, and perhaps even my stubbornness. I sat there, allowing the truth to descend upon me like a storm's dust. "Now what should I do?" I inquired. My mother gave me a tender gaze, just like she had when I was a young child and afraid. "That relies on your preferences," she added. "Justice? Recognition? Or only to be recognized as Eleanor's grandchild, as she always knew?" I still didn't have a response. However, I was convinced of one thing. I was determined to never, ever allow Douglas to remove me from this family. The following morning, I parked my car outside Uncle James's apartment. My heart was racing and my fingers were shaking on the steering wheel. The previous evening, I had contacted him and explained that I needed to discuss some family matters prior to the will reading. I told him only that. I didn't even know where to begin. James greeted me with the same understated friendliness I had experienced as a child. Books, pictures from his study excursions, and the aroma of Earl Grey tea filled his abode. He gestured for me to sit while passing me a cup. "Emily, you seem troubled," he replied softly. "Regarding the estate, is Douglas causing trouble?" I looked into my tea and remarked, "It's more than that." I found myself speechless. What is the best way to ask a man if he may be your father? I put down the cup. "Did you ever hang out with my mom before she married Douglas?" The cup hung in midair as his hand froze on the way to his mouth. He squinted his eyes and looked into mine. "Why would you pose that question?" I inhaled deeply. "Douglas has informed me that he is not my biological father. Douglas is contesting my position in Grandmother Eleanor's will by citing this information." He carefully and slowly put down the cup. He whispered, "That sounds like Douglas. Critical and strategic." I told him everything my mother had told me, including the timing, their previous love, and her choice. With each phrase, his expression changed from bewilderment to sorrow to, eventually, a hint of hope. Finally, he murmured in a hushed voice, "I never knew. She kept her pregnancy a secret from me." The next thing I knew, she was married to my brother after I had gone to Seattle. We were silent. After that, he gave me a serious look. "You think I might be your dad?" I gave a nod. "It's the only rational explanation." Douglas, however, is adamant about removing me from everything. I believe it's time for us to learn the truth. Lost in his thoughts, James got up and paced the room. He then faced me. He stated plainly, "We'll take a DNA test. Avoid speculating any longer. We'll let science make the decision." A knot in my chest started to release. "Would you agree?" He smiled slightly. "I've always had a weird connection to you, Emily. Before, I didn't grasp it. However, I would like to know whether I am your father. I want to do it correctly." We visited a private lab that afternoon, the kind that guaranteed quick, covert results. After turning in our samples, we departed with a 72-hour deadline. We had just enough time to complete the reading. I was sitting on the side of my bed at my apartment, looking up at the ceiling. A lot of memories seemed different today. James's giggle, the way he never forgot my birthday, and Grandmother Eleanor's smile every time he walked in the door brought back memories. Did she know? I contacted Grandmother's personal lawyer, Bernard Walsh, the following day. I did not contact Harrison Mills, who was Douglas's closest ally and the family lawyer. In an attempt to gain some clarity, I drove to Bernard's workplace. He was firm but courteous. "Unfortunately, I am unable to reveal the will's specifics prior to the formal reading," he stated. I paused. "Did Eleanor find out? Concerning me? Concerning my ancestry?" For an instant, Bernard's composed face wavered. With caution, he said, I can't comment on that. However, I must add that your grandma was a very perceptive woman. She noticed almost everything. I learned everything from that. Grandma was aware. She'd finally realized the truth, but maybe not from the start, and she had somehow kept it safe. That night, I received a formal letter. Harrison Mills had submitted a petition to postpone the will reading, using legal strategies to delay the process while he developed a case against me. Douglas was moving more quickly than I had anticipated. Unexpectedly, pneumonia led to Bernard's hospital admission. The system is user-friendly. Too easy. He was getting rid of everybody who could get in his way. My mother called in a panic that evening. Douglas is aware that you and James met. He is enraged. Emily, exercise caution. He turns dangerous when he feels threatened. With the soft buzz of the city outside my window, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I had no idea what would come next. However, I was aware that I was no longer alone. An email came in 2 days later. It came from the laboratory. My heart thumping so loudly, I could hardly hear anything else, my hands shaking as I opened it. Buried in the thick medical jargon, I swiftly scrolled to the end and saw the line I had been waiting for. Paternity probability, 99.999998%. I have a biological father named James Blackwell. I released a long breath that I had been holding without realizing it. My eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but also from the rush of emotions that hit me at once. Anger that it had taken so long, thankfulness for finally knowing the truth, and sadness for the years we had lost. I gave James a call right away. After a single ring, he responded. I only stated, "It's confirmed. You are my dad." For a few seconds, he was silent. Then he remarked, I had a feeling, Emily. Those eyes of yours, they're just like your mother's, in a quiet, shaky voice. However, something else was always present. It was a relationship that I had never fully understood before. I stayed silent because I couldn't think of anything to say. The quiet was comforting, like two spirits sitting next to each other without talking. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't stop imagining what may occur at the will reading. Even though I now had the facts on paper, I had a feeling Douglas wouldn't give up lightly. My phone rang again the following morning, and it was Harrison Mills. He desired to meet. Despite my hesitation, my curiosity won out. I accepted, and later that afternoon I entered his office, which was filled with the sense of secrets, pricey cologne, and polished wood. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he greeted me. I appreciate you coming, Emily. I sat across from him, maintaining a neutral look. He folded his hands neatly on the desk and remarked, I understand you've conducted a DNA test. My stomach turned over. How was he aware? He went on, Douglas is quite distressed. He tossed a document across the desk in my direction and said, he asked me to make you a proposal. I slowly opened it. I would have to give up any claims to grandmother Eleanor's estate under the terms of the waiver agreement. In return, the recipient will receive $250,000 in a single payment. Stunned, I looked up. You're not serious. It's an offering, he remarked calmly. It prevents a messy court battle and spares everyone from embarrassment. I pushed the folder back across the desk. Harrison, she named me in her will. Yes, he said. We assumed you were Douglas's daughter. That's uncertain now. I bent over. I am the daughter of James. I am, therefore, by blood, Eleanor's biological granddaughter. Isn't that the norm Douglas has been advocating for the entire time? He took a while to reply. He simply gazed at me with an overly composed expression. He eventually responded, There are complexities, lawful ones. You might not fully comprehend the ramifications. I stood up and said, I understand enough. Douglas believes I'm not a true Blackwell, which is why he wants me gone. However, this could all backfire on him if he is mistaken. His voice trailed behind me as I turned to go. He's ready to be aggressive, Emily. Before turning down that offer, give it some serious thought. The temperature outside his office was lower than usual. With my mind racing, I walked carefully back to my car. Could it be that he was bluffing? But what if he wasn't? James called again that evening. His voice was tense as he said, I have something to tell you. One recently learned about something from an old family friend. I prepared myself. Douglas isn't a Blackwell in biology. I went cold. What? James continued. We adopted him. Our parents kept it a secret. After years of infertility struggles, they adopted him as a newborn. Our mother then fell pregnant with me years later. They kept it a secret because they never wanted Douglas to feel like he wasn't family. However, Mom filled Eleanor in on everything. For a moment, I was unable to breathe. Douglas had been torturing me about bloodlines and not being a true Blackwell all this time. Now, though, and he wasn't one. With my head spinning, I sat down hard on my bed. Is he aware? I inquired. I don't believe so, James answered. However, he might have disqualified himself under the Blackwell Trust's rules if the truth is revealed. The weight of this realization hung between us as we sat in quiet for a long time. He wanted to cut me out with this idea of blood purity, I muttered. Perhaps it's time for him to follow the same guideline. James took a while to respond. When he did, however, his voice was calm and quiet. Emily, I'll support whatever you decide. In an instant, the power dynamics changed. The girl who had always felt like she didn't belong suddenly found herself alone. A certain quiet intensity clung to the autumn air on the morning of the will reading. Tension simmered beneath every polished surface and every measured glance, but the Blackwell estate appeared grand as usual, bathed in golden sunshine. Along with James, I got there early. As we entered the grand entrance together, father and daughter, for the first time, not only in emotion but in reality, Dad nodded reassuringly. Soon after, the rest of the family started to arrive. Last to enter, Douglas exuded confidence like cologne. His shoulders were set, and his clothes were immaculate. My brothers, William and Thomas, sat on either side of him, avoiding eye contact. A leather-bound portfolio was placed in front of Harrison Mills, who was seated at the head of the long mahogany dining table. Harrison Mills stamped the Blackwell crest, a symbol of riches, authority, and now resentful division. On the cover, Harrison stated with ease, I have a delicate matter to address regarding succession eligibility before we begin. Douglas steepled his fingers and relaxed back in his chair. His eyes were already filled with smug satisfaction. Harrison went on, we have discovered that some of the beneficiaries listed in Eleanor Blackwell's will might not be eligible under the Blackwell Family Trust's bloodline provisions. And there it was. Douglas grabbed the opportunity. I think it's important to make it clear that Emily is not my biological daughter, he declared in a cool, collected tone. Therefore, she is not entitled to any portion of the inheritance governed by bloodline criteria under the terms of the trust. Around the table, there was a murmur. James tensed up next to me as my mother held my hand beneath the table. As he passed a folder across the table toward Harrison, Douglas continued, I have DNA evidence. That proves Emily is not my child. I tightened my jaw. Until now, I was unaware that he had taken a sample. How was my DNA obtained? I asked icily. Douglas turned to face me with a smug tone in his voice. Last month, during dinner, I was drinking from your water glass. Really, it's very easy. James's hand crashed onto the table. That is against the law. Ever the devoted counselor, Harrison waved the worry away. The collection method's validity comes second. The outcomes are self-evident. I sensed the trap getting closer. Douglas had attempted to outsmart us and make me appear dishonest before I could say anything, despite everything we had planned and prepared. However, he had misjudged me. More significantly, he had misjudged the reality. I reached into my bag and said steadily, I have additional documentation. I am a direct blood descendant of Eleanor Blackwell, as confirmed by DNA, with James Blackwell as my biological father. There was a startled quiet. Even William and Thomas appeared surprised. In a moment, Douglas's arrogance vanished. Anger made his face flush red. However, I wasn't done yet. James was standing next to me, composed yet determined. Speaking to the group, he stated, direct bloodline descent from Harold Blackwell is required for the trust. In that case, I, Eleanor's only biological child, would be the only eligible successor. He hesitated for a moment before delivering the final blow. Additionally, Douglas was adopted. The room exploded. Harrison seems to have had the rug yanked out from under him. With an accusing finger, Douglas leaped from his chair. That is untrue! That's the truth. James said softly. The adoption records are with us. We also have another DNA test to confirm it. Douglas looked around, as if he was searching for someone to counter the recent statement. However, nobody said anything. I bent over. I gently reminded him, you stated that only blood relatives should receive the family fortune. Well, you've just disqualified yourself by your own standards. Douglas's poise broke as his fists tightened at his sides. Bernard Walsh entered the room through the double doors at the far end. He leaned heavily on a cane, appeared older and thinner, but his presence was powerful. I think I was asked to supervise this will reading, he replied, his voice piercing the tension like a sword. Harrison's face went white. Bernard motioned for the papers and sat down at the table. He looked at Douglas and me and said, I know there have been some developments. Then let's move forward and let the truth speak for itself. Bernard was adjusting his reading glasses when he took a sealed envelope with the Blackwell crest embossed on heavy cream paper out of the portfolio. The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on him. Douglas, who just a few moments before had exuded confidence, now appeared pale and agitated. This letter was given to me by Eleanor Blackwell. Bernard started. She told me to read her will solely in the event that questions about ancestry came up. He broke the wax seal. As he unfolded the paper and started reading it out loud, it shook a little in his hands. To my family members assembled here, if you are reading this letter, the secret I've been keeping for decades has finally come to light. Douglas was not born of Blackwell blood, as I have long known. After years of devastating miscarriages, my husband and I decided to adopt him as a baby and raise him as my son out of love. Emily is James's biological daughter, and I've known that since the first time I touched her. A grandma is familiar with her own ancestry. According to my father's creation of the Blackwell Trust, major inheritance requires a blood relationship. Being aware of this, I made sure that my own estate, which makes up the majority of the Blackwell fortune, was set up to reflect my goals rather than antiquated ancestry laws. I say this to Douglas. In every aspect that mattered, you were my son. However, the way you treated Emily, your brother's child, exposed a part of you that I cannot support. You've let control and resentment make you oblivious to family and love. Only blood should inherit, you insisted. Therefore, you have eliminated yourself based on your own reasoning. Silence fell for a beat. Bernard then resumed speaking in a composed yet determined tone. The inheritance will be divided as follows in compliance with Eleanor Blackwell's last wishes and in view of the DNA evidence proving Emily's biological parentage and Douglas's adoption. He hesitated, scanning the table before focusing on Douglas. We must transfer all trust property requiring Blackwell ancestry to James Blackwell and Emily, his biological daughter. In accordance with the bequests specified in her codicil, James and Emily will also get a portion of Eleanor's personal inheritance, which includes her investments, properties, and private possessions. Douglas's voice trembled as he sprang out of his chair. This is impossible! For more than half a century, I have been her son! This is treachery. Bernard remained unflinching. You brought up the idea of blood entitlement in our conversation. Eleanor just made sure you met your own expectations. You said you would, Douglas yelled as he turned to face me, quivering and flushed. You claimed that the wealth should only go to bloodkin. I carefully stood up and looked him in the eye. No, I muttered. You stated that. All I wanted was that you would honor your promise. Douglas gazed at me, a wave of comprehension washing over him. The room had betrayed him. Disgraced, Harrison Mills sat motionless. The disturbance to my brother's loyalty left them shocked and uncertain. James put a steady hand on my shoulder as my mother sat quietly with tears in her eyes. The man who had dedicated his life to securing the Blackwell legacy's gates now found himself barred by the exact regulations he had once employed as weapons. Though it wasn't the end yet, it was a suitable conclusion. I sat in silence, allowing the enormity of everything to slowly sink in as the room gradually cleared and the weight of the discoveries started to settle. Harrison followed like a guy who had just watched the end of his career as Douglas stormed off, his pride and illusions destroyed. Not only was their demise rapid and violent, but it was also lyrical. Thomas and William, my brothers, stayed a while. Douglas's strict demands had molded them, and they had grown up idolizing him. However, Douglas's strict demands broke such delusions, Thomas remarked in a low voice. I had no idea about any of this, with a guilty sounding tone. The way he treated you over the years now makes a horrible sort of sense. Beside him, William nodded, his inner lawyer obviously considering the ramifications. You've always been our sister, Emily, for the record. That remains unchanged. Despite their simplicity, their statements had greater meaning than I had anticipated. I had always been the one attempting to gain a place at the table, the outsider and the afterthought. I was the only one who really belonged now. I didn't gloat, though. I only nodded slightly in gratitude. Then my mom arrived. Her eyes were filled with relief and sadness as she walked slowly closer. With a quivering voice, she uttered, I should have told you years ago, however, I didn't know how. For once, I didn't feel the need to shield her from the reality as I looked her in the eye. I answered, You are attempting to keep me safe. I now realize that. However, if something this significant ever comes up again, don't shield me from it. Join me in facing it. Her eyes gleamed as she nodded. James and I sat in grandmother's study later that night. I guess that's our study now. As always, there was a subtle scent of lemon oil and ancient books in the air. Surrounded by artifacts from a family history we were still working to rewrite, we sat across from one another. Now, what are you going to do? He questioned me in a hushed, unsure voice. I looked around the room, taking in the shiny desk filled with so many choices and the shelves filled with stories. And I was aware. I said, I'll construct something new. We lost a great deal of time, but perhaps we can make up some of it. He grinned. I'd somehow known that warm, familiar smile my entire life, but I didn't know why. I really want that. And I didn't feel like an imposter in my own life for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. I felt a sensation of recognition. I had a sense of selection. I was at home. Word of what had transpired discreetly circulated among old family friends and extended family in the days following the will reading. A few were astonished, but others remained strangely quiet. However, the majority readily accepted the reality after reading grandmother's last letter, which Bernard released at her request. Everyone had always known in their hearts that Douglas's treatment of me was strange. At last, they realized why. Douglas never succeeded in his legal threats. His case collapsed before it even made it to court since he lacked the validity of bloodline, and the adoption records and DNA evidence were used against him. His hitherto faithful lawyer, Harrison Mills, quietly stepped down from all family law cases. He was reportedly under investigation for ethical transgressions, and with good reason. On the other hand, James and I embarked on a new journey, reclaiming a portion of our history as equals, not just as father and daughter. We managed one of grandmother's favorite initiatives, the Eleanor Blackwell Foundation, which she had financed with her own money. Under our care, it evolved into more than just a representation of the family name. It became a force for good, supporting women in academic research, providing scholarships, and funding historical preservation initiatives, all of which are things she would have wanted. As grandmother's legitimate heir, I moved into her mansion rather than as a visitor. Now the rooms had a distinct feel, warmer, lighter. I opened the windows more frequently to let the crisp air take the place of the stuffy formality. I transformed her study into my personal work area and stocked it with family photos, old manuscripts, and maps that gave me a sense of aliveness. This time, I added new ones to the collection. James and I sat in the yard one peaceful evening, watching the sun set over the fall foliage. He sipped his tea and remarked softly, She would have been proud of you, of how you managed everything. Across the estate, where I had once felt like an outsider in my own family, I gazed. I answered, She gave me the strength. She was always aware of my true identity. Even if I didn't, James gave a nod, and we sat quietly for a bit, allowing the moment to unfold. That night, my phone buzzed once. It was a call from an unknown number. We're still family, Emily. I'm hoping you'll comprehend one day. Douglas, after staring at it for a while, I deleted it without responding. Rebuilding certain bridges is not their intended purpose. Once they are known, certain truths completely change everything. Furthermore, I had no plans to turn back. I now had a new family, one based on honesty and love rather than duty or outward appearances. I choose one. Above all, it was the individual who chose me. I understood that to be the genuine inheritance. It's not the money that matters. The estate does not possess the cash, but the reality, the liberty. Finally, I had the chance to live a life that truly belonged to me.